The old school way was absorbing the chaos of your client's business and
Hmm.
dealing with it and trying to create some sort of structure from it internally. You see a lot of businesses now that try to have a barrier where it's, hey, we're just not going to absorb it, so you figure it out. The best businesses actually have their processes extend into their client's business, creating more order and efficiency within their client's business all the way through into their own.
Tell us about Strategy Ladders in your business.
Strategy Ladders is a consulting company that I started after basically 15 years of entrepreneurship and consulting and coaching other entrepreneurs. Our focus is marketing agencies and B2B service companies. And so the majority of my clients fall somewhere between 20 and 200 employees. The vast majority of them are in that 20 to 60 employee range, and they are B2B service companies. I say that because some people really hate the term agency, but these are companies that are primarily tech focused, providing services to other businesses. And they run the gamut from I'm working with other consulting companies, coaching teams, IT firms. So it really runs the gamut, not just the more traditional marketing firm, performance marketing firms, content marketing firms. So I really work with the whole gamut there. And I got into doing this after having built a number of businesses on my own, then getting into the marketing world, initially as a consultant, then building an agency and selling an agency myself. I found that the agency world has been, I don't want to say it's been underserved. I want to say it's been poorly served up to this point because there's a lot of people out there trying to assist agencies, but there's not a lot of people out there that are assisting agencies that actually have real world experience.
Yeah, one thing that jumped out about your system, because I've seen you lay out, this is how we take people through the process. And I know it changes a little bit from company to company, but it was very clear, like you had this structured approach. We're going to get the CEO out of the business. We're going to get the right people in the right seats, all those good things, but it's a much crisper, leaner approach than a lot of the approaches that are out there that are maybe 20, 30, 40 years old. And I know you've posted on that as well. For anybody who's picking this up, so Brian is living the quintessential surfer's life, working remotely from the beach and then just crushing it at the same time. So we bonded over the surfboard in the background and all that. So you adopted, this is off script, but I'm curious, like you moved to the beach, so to speak, or to a different beach right around the beginning of the pandemic. Was this a move you were already making? Had you already decided, hey, I can be remote?
Yeah, so at the time, I was actually planning on moving to Portugal. And
Hmm.
when COVID hit, my wife and I, we weren't married yet, but we're a COVID marriage. So that's
Well,
also
hey,
part
if
of
you could, I bet if you can make it through COVID together.
Oh
Uh,
man. It feels like it's been a very long relationship just because of how much we've had to go through.
yeah,
But
man.
at the time, I was consulting with agencies, but I had a very different model. I was flying out and going to the actual offices of my clients at least once a month. But I ended up, on average, I was working about 20 hours a week, and it was super lucrative having these three clients. And I was at the time planning on going through this process of moving to Portugal because, frankly, it's just one of the easiest ways to get into the EU as an American. And COVID hit, we stayed in LA longer than we probably should have, but we were there for about 10 months after COVID hit. And then we went and drove across the border into Mexico and went to Ensenada, and that was really supposed to just be our sort of stopping off point and then still possibly go to Portugal. And we stayed there and we started looking at other areas that were easier to get to based on current COVID restrictions and everything. And we narrowed it down to La Paz and Panama City, Panama. And because not only do I surf, but I do a lot of outrigger canoeing. And so I'm also
Mm.
looking for where are the best locations for outrigger canoeing. And there's a big outrigger canoe community down in Panama. And ultimately, we just got sucked into La Paz. Anybody who ends up in La Paz will tell you, like, they came here to visit and they never left. And that's more or less what happened to us.
It's awesome. The balance of lifestyle and still delivering a modern business is super interesting, because you're proving you can do it. But the questions I usually hit. So, what are your three biggest goals right now?
Personally, well, I have a wife that's about to give birth, so a lot of things are centered around keeping my wife happy at the moment.
Yeah, yeah, I get
But
that.
but no, I think for me, a lot of what I'm doing right now is putting into practice the things that I do for my clients. And
Hmm.
so I've been in a growth mode, hiring. I'm in the process of hiring some people right now, putting some processes in place so that at the end of the day, the vast majority of the work I do with my clients is the same. And it's not always something that can be done through like a course per se, just following a video, but there are skills and methodologies that can be taught to other people. And so
Hmm.
that's really the process that I'm going through right now, is figuring out what are the areas, like what parts of the business can I create the highest return, the highest financial return by doing myself, and then what can I step away from. And my goals are really just around hitting various monthly recurring numbers, trying to get that up to six figures a month, and then stepping away from a lot of the day to day so I can focus on the client, focus on like higher level client strategy. And then the other big goal that I was discussing over breakfast this morning is in November, we're planning on having a event down here, like basically a retreat down here in Baja. So we're putting that together and hopefully going to be able to announce that in a couple of weeks. So
That's awesome. I think one of the reasons that we originally connected around strategy and how you build an organization that can scale, and was super impressed by your work in that. But the other thing that jumped out at me is I come from a family where there are surfing entrepreneurs out there that have started businesses, that have been successful in businesses. So I know that my cousins are going to see this, and I'll finally be able to send them something where they're like, "Oh wow, okay, I get what you do now." But the surfing is what's going to bring them in, between
yeah.
surfing and entrepreneurship. So what you do with strategy ladders is you're giving the CEO and the company a structure they can use to grow and scale more effectively. What's the thing that you see hold CEOs and companies back in doing that? Why aren't they able to do it? Why are they calling you in the first place?
And I think my approach to this is one of the things that sets me apart, because I'm one of the few people that brings a really holistic approach to this type of consulting. Most of the time what you see is breaking down sales and operations, and then sometimes branding as well. And I don't think that you can actually separate those, because the vast majority of agencies, and I talk about what I call the rule of 20, which you'll see again and again, which is a agency typically maxes out at about 20 employees per founding member, I should say. And so you'll see a single founder having a 20-person team, founding team of three founders may get up to 60 employees, but that's where they generally max out. And most of the clients I bring on follow that framework. They're usually like the last clients I signed on were a three-member team with 58 employees, a three-member team with 64 employees, and three-member founding teams, I'm saying, and a two founding member team with 36 employees. So they all are matching that very closely. But what ends up happening is, or one of the reasons that happens is, it starts with what the offering is that the agency is bringing to market. And
Mm.
so how this usually manifests is you've got a full service offering or something that is not well defined, where there's a lot of flexibility. So the founders or very high executive level people are responsible not just for the sale, but also for the client strategy, because nobody can truly understand a true full service agency's offerings better than the founder, because you have to
Mhm.
understand capacity, you have to understand capabilities, you have to understand price sensitivity and costs and all of these things that no other salesperson is able to walk into. To that end, I have worked with clients, and one of the clients I just mentioned, they hired their CRO almost a year ago, and their CRO still can't go out and start going after sales yet, because what they offer is just too complicated and the CRO still
Mm,
hasn't learned everything yet. So what we do is we focus first on the sales offering, because all of this comes back to the sales. Once we identify the sales offering and we define it clearly, this is no longer we do full service consulting, full service agency, anything. It is we solve this problem. That
mhm.
does a number of different things. It defines your strategy. So now the strategy is already predefined in terms of how you deal with clients. And it becomes something that then you can teach to other salespeople to step in. So now everything has just been right sized. Then we take that and we create the processes through the business. And then we start dealing with the operations. So the operations then are tied to the processes to deliver this particular solution. And I could talk for hours about all of the follow-on impacts, but the simplest thing is sales get easier because you're also solving a problem. I don't have to get on a call any longer as an agency owner to explain all of the various things we can do, because you either have the problem or you don't. So most of my
Mhm.
sales calls are no longer just, general connecting calls. They generally are turning more into closing calls because people have already pre-selected whether or not they want to work with us. And then through that process, we create, again, the operating system within the organization that ties to that specific solution that you're selling. And I can get all into how we flow that through the operation side too, but
Well,
a
what I
long
love
way
about
of
it,
saying it's that.
yeah, but what I love about it is you've got operations doing what operations needs to do, which is we're either increasing the revenue we can bring in, or we're decreasing the cost to deliver that revenue. Right. I think a lot of times people, as you mentioned, they'll silo out operations, and operations takes on this life of its own.
Yeah.
And it really is there to either help you raise what people will pay or lower the cost to deliver what people will pay. As a friend of mine, Dr. Rebecca Humkeys, is always like, there's what people will pay, there's your cost to deliver it, and values the gap between. So your job is to push those apart. I really like that. Let me flip to my next question here.
Well, and I can take that a step further too. And one of the ways that we do that, and this is a takeaway for anybody that's listening to this or watching this, that one of the ways that we increase that value is by, again, we determine a problem. So I take clients through, first of all, where are you delivering somebody to? What is that solution that you're taking somebody to? Then identify where they're starting from. And then
Mhm.
if we can put a time frame on that to get from this point to this point, now what you're doing is, instead of just taking a uncomfortable situation, you're taking a challenge or an uncomfortable situation and turning it actually into a problem. Because if I tell you that, hey, I can get it so that you're no longer working in your business, you say, okay, that's great. Like, there's a lot of people who can help me no longer work in my business. And I know at some point I'm going to build a business that I can step away from. That nobody goes into business assuming that they're going to work 100-hour weeks. But if I say I can do that for you in 9 months or in 90 days, now you working in your business becomes a problem, because you say there's only 9 months between where I am today and me being able to step away from the day to day in my business and go take a month-long vacation with my wife. And that becomes a problem. And that's where, even before we address how the operations is it being handled, we just increase the value of the solution that's being delivered by adding a time frame to it. And so we do that with most of my clients. And an example, a client that used to sell the exact same solution and they would always get it done within 3 months, they just added a guarantee to complete the solution within 3 months. And they increased without even trying. It was a mistake because they hadn't discussed what they were going to charge for it. They accidentally charged double what they were charging before as an upfront instead of a monthly payment. And they had absolutely no pushback on it. And the only thing they did was commit to the time frame that they were, and use it as a marketing piece on something that they
Mhm.
were already doing.
Yeah, it's super interesting. I think that certain things can take time when they involve change, but a lot of the technology related things and operational things that people do, we're able to move at just a much faster pace now without creating any more I'd say any more friction on the change. Like I find that people can push back on any change, but if you're going to make a change, you might as well make a good one, right?
I think it goes a little bit deeper than that. And it has to do with the way that agencies have shifted. We used to see this like bespoke strategy as being a positive thing. But I think that now we're seeing it for what it is. The bespoke strategy for most businesses, and this is what I see with my clients, is the first 1 to 3 months with a client is this like mess, and that's the bespoke strategy. But once they get through that, they end up on the back end delivering very similar solutions for all of their clients. And so when we get rid of that and instead say, no, you as the client need to adhere to how we do things, you break down that and you also force clients that are actually ready for change to self-select. But then when they come in, you're able to get them to that solution that much quicker. And so I think some of this is technology, but the other piece of it is we're seeing businesses change. This is no longer the full service. This is you get your organization ready to change and then show up ready, and boom, then we take you through the process.
Yeah, yeah. That's super interesting. How do you balance that it's going to be this way, we're going to have this process, with something we talked about in a previous conversation, which is I'm the founder, I'm the CEO, I've run my ship the way I want to run my ship. So there's that desire to control how
Yep.
things are getting done. How do you see that balance shake out?
The founders that are very, very rooted in control are going to be a bottleneck in their business no matter what. And
Right.
so you're going to see them preventing the business from growing. And as somebody who also comes from a coaching background as well, I view that structure as part of the coaching,
Mm,
because you're forcing somebody to give up some of that control. Because when I used to do coaching, like high dollar, really life coaching for founders, they wanted everything bespoke. They wanted to have the high level experience. If I gave them the choice between meeting me on the beach in Hermosa Beach or meeting me at Terranea, they always wanted to go to Terranea. They want to go and spend the high dollar, have the very high end experience. But I think sometimes getting rid of those types of clients is a good thing, because
mm,
then you get the clients that actually want to work. And the way I describe it is this: the old school way was absorbing the chaos of your client's business and
mm.
dealing with it and trying to create some sort of structure from it internally. You see a lot of businesses now that try to have a barrier where it's, hey, we're just not going to absorb it, so you figure it out. The best businesses actually have their processes extend into their client's business, creating more order and efficiency within their client's business all the way through into their own.
Yeah, I really like that way of phrasing it. We used to absorb the client's chaos. And I've seen that again and again because you get into being customer focused and customer driven. And it's like, what do you want? What do you want? What do you want? But the chaos ends up taking over. That
Yeah.
really resonates. And I've seen that in so many businesses. Whereas if you go to get a house built, the architect's not, yeah, we can totally have it lean all the way over to the right. There's certain guidelines of physics you have to have. There's certain things you have to do to get permitting and all those things. They're relatively unchanging laws.
But take that same example really quickly, though. Think about it like this: that architect who's willing to do anything and everything that the client wants to do and take it into account and figure out how to make it work, that architect might build 2 houses a year. But then you
Mm,
have like Lennar and the massive home builders that are building literally thousands of homes every month. And it's because they give you like 4 options. So you're adhering to them as opposed to the other way around. Both are very fine ways to do business, but they have very different outcomes for the owner. So you have to decide
mm.
what type of outcome you want to have. And if you want to enjoy, I call the people that love doing the bespoke stuff, those are driven by passion, the passion for doing the work. Other people are more motivated by what I call lifestyle, which is the balance of time and money, and
Mm.
having that. You oftentimes can't have both unless you can charge extremely high dollar and you're extremely well known.
Yeah, that's super interesting. A super interesting observation. Kind of switching gears a little bit to more of the operational stuff. I've seen teams have all kinds of operational tech. And this is a really common thing. I was talking with a CEO who's a friend of mine the other day, not on result maps yet, but he was saying, "Oh, we got so many tools." He's like, "Man, we have so many tools. I haven't even been in some of them yet." There's like, with all the availability of different tools, and then each department gets its own version of ops, for example, or projects and tasks. What have you seen work in terms of helping companies simplify all that stuff and really focus it in on, okay, guys, we're going to get our sell right, we're going to get our process right, et cetera, et cetera. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So I step into a lot of those situations where they've already invested a bunch of time and money into project management systems, into internal communication tools, various BPM tools and so forth. But the thing that probably solves 70 to 80% of all of the problems within an organization, within the way that they use all of those tools, is how they communicate, is changing how they communicate outside of those tools. And so
Mm.
what I mean by that is, because I work with a lot of agencies, oftentimes we're dealing with their creative process.
Mm-hmm.
And so even though we'll go through and map out the creative process and try to make sure that everything is lined up with the project management system, the two interventions that solve the vast majority of problems are, number one, having a killer project brief. So we've got a clear document at the beginning of the process that defines what the overall expectations are, and then a kickoff call with that,
Mm-hmm.
and making sure that both of those, the document and the kickoff call, are run correctly, that accountability is being brought into it. Those solve the vast majority of the problems. And I think you probably see this too, that all too often people leaders, I should say, try to lean on the tools to solve interpersonal issues.
Yeah.
And there's no getting around it. You just need to have the communication.
That's another one that came up. It makes me think of another conversation with a friend of mine's managing director who does client work. And he was lamenting going into a company. He got thrown into system X and he started getting all these notifications. And he's like, we need to have some conversations about these things before we just jump off into these activities. Let's make sure we're picking the right things to work on. So that makes me think of just a cadence for checking in, making sure you're working on the right things. Do you have a cadence you usually advocate people should be using? I think you mentioned monthly, just looking at progress monthly.
Well, there's a couple of different ways. You and I had talked about that, and I'll get to that momentarily, the monthly cadence. But first and foremost, when assessing the organization, we step entirely outside of tools. So as far as
Mhm.
checking in, we actually start out with daily check-ins. And I have a specific hierarchical daily stand-up tool that we use, or just approach, not a tool itself. But it's amazing how often leaders want to immediately say, well, do we really have to have these check-ins, or can we just use a tool for this? And one of the valuable things about communicating with individuals in that way is it quickly helps diagnose where there's problems in the organization. The tools sometimes can obfuscate them.
Mhm.
And so the daily check-ins can really reveal where there's breakdowns in authority, for instance, because when things are being elevated too high in the organization in the hierarchical stand-ups, then you realize where you have to then step back and redefine roles and responsibilities so people can take care of things earlier on in the organization. But then as far as checking in, I check in with my clients, I promote a weekly and monthly approach. So weekly, for instance, we do our strategic planning. Strategic plan, we actually check in once a week, and then once a month, we update the plan. So it's a constant rolling 12-month plan. So weekly, we check in, then at the end of the month, we update it. And that is where we review what has been accomplished and then roll into the next month. Depending on the projects that my clients are working on, I'm usually promoting anywhere between weekly and monthly check-ins on those as well. But for the cadence of running the company, it's, you want to have a pulse on what's happening on a day-to-day basis, and then week to week and month to month. But beyond that, and I should add too, the vast majority of my clients, if we look at where they can reasonably forecast their revenue, it's usually not beyond about 6 months. So to me, anything beyond 6 months is long term. So
Mm.
if you're only meeting quarterly on something and your visibility is only 6 months, that's not giving you a lot of time to be able to react to things that are changing. And so a quarterly check-in on anything in a growing business is more or less just throwing up your hands and saying we're doing it just because we need to have the optics of making it look like we care, but we're not actually doing anything material.
But I can see, and I've seen this like in particularly in more competitive markets when things are changing fast, it's got to be monthly. It's got to be monthly. When it's the situation you mentioned, like a services environment, it's got to be monthly. I know there are companies that do 3 months, and I like 3 months maybe as a, hey, are the goals we set for the year, are they the right goals? Because now you've got 3 months of data, so you can realign. But I know that a lot of people are really groomed, like it's got to be 3 months, it's got to be 3 months. And I think that idea of weekly and monthly sometimes gets missed, especially in a fast paced world,
Yeah.
especially when you've got a lot of uncertainty. So you mentioned 6 months as a cash cycle. So yeah, if you don't have certainty past that 6 months in this environment, in the modern environment, what are some of the practices you think, or any that come to mind that maybe those practices are a few decades old? They don't apply so much anymore. Like for me, one that comes up is everybody gets really excited about agile. We haven't talked about this, so you don't have to go on any sort of agile rant. But for me, like that's table stakes. Like we
Yeah.
need to be checking in every week minimum and making sure that we're sprinting on the right things, that we're staying focused. Are there any other things you've seen out there that really might ought to be left back in the 1900s?
Here's a number of things. So the one that I think is probably the biggest that comes to mind is how we construct communication and roles and responsibilities within an
Mm,
organization.
yeah.
Because traditionally we do it based off of an organizational structure. And so most of the concepts that we're talking about, even communicating on a quarterly cycle, that is coming from a much more, it comes from a perspective of a much larger company. It does not work with the smaller companies of today, nor does the way that we come up with our job descriptions, roles and responsibilities, and so forth. Because what happens is the way that when we create our roles and responsibilities in a small company, there's a lot of overlap. You end up with, if your team is 40 people and you don't have really dialed in roles and responsibilities, you could easily have 40 to 50% of your company's capabilities completely unutilized.
Mm,
And the way that I shift my clients' thinking on this is to shift them from a top-down sort of hierarchical org chart approach to this to a process-based definition of roles and responsibilities. And so if
mhm,
you think
mhm,
about the way that most people are doing roles and responsibilities today, if you look at how a process, like let's say a deliverable is moving through the process of a creative process, individuals have different steps that they're responsible for, different sets of steps. But there's breaks at different points throughout the process. So what ends up happening, and every agency owner knows this, you either have when something when there's a breakdown in the system, it either falls down to somebody who's way too junior, or more often it bubbles up to people who are way too senior. So
mm,
your roles and responsibilities actually need to be defined around the processes. Your managers should be actually managing an entire process. That's not how most people are set up. And until you set up that way, you actually need a much larger organizational structure to manage most processes. But when you start developing your organizational structure around your processes, you can streamline and get a lot more done with a lot fewer people.
How did your system evolve? Have you thought about like when you went, okay, this is repeatable, I can show other people how to do this?
Absolutely. So I had been coming into COVID, I was working as a strategy consultant. I was basically like an outsourced CSO, chief strategy officer. And then I briefly stepped into doing like outsourced COO work or fractional COO work. And what I immediately realized in doing that type of work is that a lot of businesses, if you don't force the owner into taking action, no matter what resources you bring in, they're still going to fiddle around and do the same thing. And so that's where my coaching came in. And I said, I'm doing the same thing with these businesses, or I'm at least trying to work them towards it to get them to these outcomes. And I know what works because I've implemented it. I have implemented this at dozens of businesses. So I went ahead and just started mapping out, this is the process I'm going to take people through, and then pre-selling them on the strategy instead of building the strategy side by side with the client once they had hired me. So by coming in with the strategy and saying, this is what we're doing, and having everything already mapped out, it has dramatically sped up the amount that I can accomplish with the client, and has also allowed me to work with multiple clients simultaneously, because by moving them through the same process, every client I take through the process, it's a slight iteration and we can improve. I can re-record a video that I'm using to help guide them, things like that. So
I'm
it's
seeing
really,
that a lot more. Yeah, go ahead.
it's really just taking all of the lessons and creating a structure that is not only repeatable, but better serves the client, because now they're incentivized. Like I have 2 clients that are still on that old like fractional COO model. The one I've had on longest is coming up on a year. I've accomplished less with her team than I have in 1 month with my clients that are on this other model. And it's only because with this model, I'm able to really push clients along as opposed to reacting to everything that's happening within somebody's business.
Yeah, I think that it's a challenge sometimes for us as the founder to realize, hey, we need to get the right person in here and let them run and do their thing on the one hand. On the other hand, when I talk to a lot of founders that adopt a system like this, they don't want to reinvent the wheel. They want something proven.
Yeah.
And having that proven approach is really powerful. And I love how you've refined it just like it's a product, because I'm
Yeah.
a product guy. So the fact that you are re-recording the video or tweaking things here and there as you learn, there's a lot of great systems that really develop that way. So kudos to you on that. Tell me, how can people reach you? What's the best way to connect with you?
The best way is you can either email me, Brian, Brian, at strategyladders.com. You can head over to strategyladders.com or LinkedIn. That's how I've been meeting. That's how you and I met, and that's how I've met a lot of great folks. I signed up a number of clients through LinkedIn now.